Hi, Terry. Nice meeting you, and glad we get to this interview on resilience. This is a great subject, and there's so much to say, especially in this time, war of Ukraine, and after the pandemic. I mean, we're speaking more and more about resilience. So this is a great topic. I can't wait for this. Couldn't wait for this interview. So before we start there, can you please introduce yourself? A few words about how you got to the GI and what you are doing to the audience.
Sure. Frederick, great to be here, and great to see you today. So in my practice, I do two things. I do leadership assessment, typically for my venture clients, and I conduct leadership assessments of the leadership team of early stage companies, typically. The other work that I do is in executive and leadership coaching. I do coaching at the individual level as well as at the team level. GRI is a tool that I've come across and have been working with over the last couple of years. And, obviously I'm very enthusiastic about it, applying right now, and then working with a number of situations that, my clients are starting to see the value of the GRI.
Very good, thank you. So resilience. What do we mean by resilience? Everyone is speaking about resilience more and more. So is it something in particular, or how could we define resilience?
There's a number of ways of thinking about resilience. I think one way to think about resilience is resilience, obviously, at the individual level. The extent to which somebody is able to sustain and work with the kind of stress that comes at them on a daily basis. And the extent to which people recover, from setbacks, either in their careers or in their lives and so forth. And, life happens, right? So I think the two ways to think about resilience in the first place is that there's resilience at the individual level. And then I think there's resilience at the organizational level, the extent to which organizationally companies are able to recover from either significant competitive stress in the marketplace, or, for instance, something that's particularly relevant today is the extent to which companies keep losing talent, right? So how do you recover,
Mhm.
from a sustained loss of talent? So there's two ways to think about, at least two ways to think about resilience.
So individual, organizational, so two tracks here. As long as the individual resilience. So that's something we have been discussing among affiliates and with clients. That resilience is not a question of style. Okay, so maybe we can comment on that, you and me. It's not just to be, or even not to be gutsy and have a certain style, but everyone can show resilience his or her own way. So can you engage into that aspect of resilience? And we spoke about adaptation. So there is this aspect of adaptation, but adapting from somewhere, which is different from all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Frederick, I think about resilience in terms at the individual level, and we can talk separately about,
Mhm.
organizational resilience. At the individual level, I think about alignment, right? The extent to which
Mhm.
somebody is aligned relative to where they are, where they think they want to be, also related to who they are, and maybe what they want to be, right? So I think, the extent to which somebody, for instance, is cut out, suitable for the role that they happen to be in. Well, if somebody doesn't have the qualities, right, or the preferences or the skill set to be able to do a job naturally, stresses are created. And so therefore, if you think about the GRI and the extent to which we can use adaptation as an maybe early indicator of stress that might be building up in individuals, I think it gives the manager, any manager, right, the opportunity to have a good conversation, with their people, and it is a very good place to start.
Mhm. That's very interesting because it leads to the manager at some point into the discussion and the ability of the manager to understand this adaptation and assist the team members to adapt their own way. So we have been speaking about the compass for many years. What is your compass? So this is understanding the compass, your own compass, and understanding really how to adapt and providing also the ability to adapt eventually more efficiently from where your compass is. So there is a lot of discussion about adaptation from somewhere. So that's at an individual level, and with the input of the manager, assistance of the manager, eventually assistance of the team, isn't it? Which leads to eventually the resilience of an organization to and back to your point right now, which is really understanding what's required at job level and making sure about the fit and the capacity of every individual to adapt in their job their own way, but also really understanding what's required in these different jobs. No, isn't it? I mean, what the focus on the job and in your search work, in your work with assessments, that's something which is critical most of the more and more. No, isn't it?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more because I think life is not just about work. And work is
Mhm.
not just about work. Work is also about life and who you actually are and who you are on the inside. So if we think about using the GRI and the dynamic of adaptation and the extent to which we can gain an insight into where somebody might be feeling stressed, especially if we think about the COVID related stresses that people have had because they're stuck at home because they're not able to engage in social activities that they otherwise might. If we think about, let's say, factor two, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who is low on factor two, therefore would prefer, analytical work, right? Somebody who, in somebody who is like that and works in a job where they need to be much more people oriented, well, that's a natural stress. But the reality is that unless that stress is managed in a way that is constructive, that allows for the individual to feel good about the stresses however they are expressed, to come through and to deal with them, then we're going to find that most likely the individual that the manager has got is probably not performing as to a level that they could, or worse still, they might be a flight risk.
Mhm, mhm. No, absolutely. And with all the experiences we have had with COVID, COVID time, as you point here, people have been through COVID time in very different ways. And the profiles has always been, really amazing to explain and to, to feedback to people how they are going through these situations, extreme situations, in many cases. So providing also some capacity to adjust when they need to adjust in a much more mindful way, something we see at work and at home in a very similar fashion. Very interestingly, there are also many parallels we do in sports. As we know, resilience in sports, so physical resilience as opposed to psychological resilience. I know you are very much into tennis, Terry, and so how in sports, we can build some parallel, not only on the physical component of resilience, but also the psychological, aspect of resilience, and particularly in tennis, of what you could have observed in tennis.
Well, sport, um, there are two things, right? Sport is, there's sport at the individual level and there's also sport at the team level. So tennis, unless you're playing doubles, right, almost by definition is sport at the individual level. And I think there's kind of resiliency in the sense that, and it applies in the sense that you need to be mindful, you need to be there, you need to be
Mhm.
focused, but you also need to be preparing outside of the times that you're playing so that you can give it your best when you are playing. But I think of the analogy of sport in the team sense, right? So if you think about high performing teams, right, whether that be on the sports arena or whether that be in a company situation, the sort of things that are needed for people to um, be able to thrive. At the end of the day, why do you want resiliency, right? You want resilience so that people can thrive, so that individuals can thrive. The way that that happens is if somebody feels good as part of a team. And if you feel good as part of that team, what you need is for you to feel safe, for you to feel that you belong, for you to feel that, if you made a mistake, is okay because we are all learning. So I think, Frederick, that if you look at some of the high performing teams, the ones that naturally do well are the teams that somehow, typically, right, somehow are able to do psychological safety because that's just what they do. They have each other's backs. They look after each other. They support each other. And when you know that you've got your team behind you, man, that means a lot. So equally in the office organization situation, if the team has that, I think there's a good chance that individuals are going to feel good as a part of the team, and individually they're going to do well.
Mm. I would always stress the importance of the coach also in sports and the role played by the coach to make sure it happens the way you just described. And similarly, at work with a manager who plays an amazing role for that cohesion to happen and this positive reinforcement and the belonging component
Yeah.
and the safety component so to happen. Coach versus manager, and manager in business having more and more the role of a coach like we see in sports. So a lot of amazing parallel that tie a resistance to business and to sport. Well, thank you, Terry. Last aspect I would, resilience is, we could speak endlessly about resilience for hours. This is just an amazing topic. But we pointed here some important aspects of it. I would like to end with one of your passion, which is opera. So tell me more about this passion.
Sometimes when you talk to people, you ask them, you say, look, if you had your life again, what would you like to do if you could do anything at all? So if I had my life again and God gave me the opportunity to come back as anything that I wanted, I would come back as an opera singer. Why? Because the opera does something that no other art form gives you, right? The music, the singing, the feeling, the tragedy, right? When you
Mhm.
put all these things together, it affects the senses and the heart and the mind in a way that no other art form does. So anyway, that's a reason why I like Puccini.
Puccini. Well, I'm not going to ask you to sing Puccini right now, although I would welcome it. But well, thank you, Terry, for your insights on engagement and also on yourself and what you are doing, including with the GI. Thanks, Terry.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Frederick.